to our little short interviews on international taxation. Today, we are really pleased. Me and Pietro Bracco, we are really pleased to have our good friend of us, that is Dali Bouzoraa. Welcome, Dali. We are really happy. We feel honored about your presence here today. We were together in the IDFD. Normally, everybody that has a good knowledge and experience in international tax field knows Dali Bouzoraa. So Dali Bouzoraa is international taxation. So we are really happy to have you here today.
Thank you.
So, Dali actually is the director manager of the managing partner also of Orbitax. And so he is the head of this organization that is specialized in international taxation issues. And so, first of all, thanks a lot again. And what do you think about your point of view, and you that with your work have a great overview of the international taxation field? What do you think about the status following this crisis now?
First of all, good afternoon to both of you. Happy to join you on this on this very interesting interviews. I had the pleasure to see a couple of them, and I'm happy also to be following up the steps of distinguished friends and colleagues. I know you had very distinguished invitees for these talks, and I'm happy to follow on their steps. Yeah, international tax scene today, obviously we have quite a lot going, right? We have a lot of governments taking action basically to limit the negative effects of the pandemic. At the same time, we have an international tax architecture, which is under construction still, and which now hits a very difficult moment in its history and its developments, right? Obviously, I'm talking here about the efforts to devise a coordinated approach to the taxation of the digital economy, right? Now, on that point, on the taxation of digital economy, we had a deadline, which is the end of the year, to arrive to a coordinated approach, right? And the OECD had tabled the unified approach with pillars 1 and 2. And normally it would be the inclusive framework or groups within the inclusive framework, which is working on the details of all of this, right? Obviously, with the crisis, a lot of governments are busy with a lot of other emergencies, and work on that has stalled a bit. I understand that the OECD is pushing towards the continuation of this effort and with keeping the same deadlines, which is very challenging already. The deadline was challenging even in the absence of the pandemic, and you can imagine that it is much more challenging with the pandemic itself. Now, there are a couple of arguments. There are two arguments which are advanced to justify why we should go forward with all of this. And there is also a third implied argument. If I would start with the implied argument itself, the implied argument is that we don't want to lose the momentum. We have now the momentum to continue with this. It's a very difficult undertaking. We actually needed the crisis to get the entire BEPS thing going. If you remember the BEPS thing, the discussion is not new. The discussion goes back to the 80s, probably even to the 70s. We had the Primarolo report in the 90s, but we needed actually the 2008 financial crisis to give the tailwind, to give actually the momentum, the political support for this project to start at all. And because of that political momentum, the OECD and all stakeholders were working under tremendous pressure, and we achieved a lot in a very short period of time, all right? So I think that is a valid argument. If there is, it would be a pity for an entire project which started, actually, which was pushed forward thanks to a crisis to come to an end because of another crisis, which is not a pandemic, right? I do have a couple of remarks on that, actually. I mean, the first remark would be that normally this type of work should be done within the inclusive framework, if at least to give the idea that it's not just the OECD with rich countries driving the agenda, right? Now, I'm not sure the inclusive framework is in a position to work on this. And maybe you have noticed the secretariat or the OECD secretariat is normally actually like the back office, right? I mean, it has very admirable tax professionals, but it is the back office. It prepares the work for the various committees which represent governments. And now it is actually the secretariat which is driving most of the work. If you have noticed, the unified approach itself was proposed by the secretariat, right? Maybe you have seen a new document, the document on, very valuable document actually, on the interpretation of tax treaties during the pandemic.
Of course.
Issued by the secretariat, right? And actually, currently, the work on the details on the how, because the why we know, it is about the how. How do we get, how do we divide or allocate taxing power in this new international architecture that we are looking at? It's also being worked on the secretariat. So it's commendable that the OECD secretariat is working on all of this, but what, if I would have a concern, is what would the effect of all of this be on the inclusiveness, right? The secretariat at the end does not represent the entire world, right? And it's commendable all what they are doing. They are really working very, very hard, producing a lot of very valuable stuff. But what does that tell us about the inclusiveness of the entire project, right? So that's probably for this implied argument that we're talking about. The second argument is that if we don't do anything, we have this proliferation of digital services taxes that we see everywhere, and it would become ever more difficult to actually get to a coordinated multilateral solution, which is true. It's a valid argument. By the last count, we did an inventory at Orbitax, and by the last count, basically, we came to about 56 countries with some form of a digital services tax of all shapes and types. It's just not like the French or Italian or Spanish, right? It's very interesting models in Argentina. There is the equalization levy in India, etc., right? And so the argument is valid, but the question then would be, why are we seeing this proliferation? Is it because of the absence of multilateral solution, the lack of multilateral solution, or because of maybe the reason that the direction we are taking towards a multilateral solution, not everybody is happy with it, right? Now, the second argument is that countries need money. And, with this new international tax architecture, they should be able to get some money at least. Well, it's true. It's a very valid argument. Countries do need money. Was looking at the Netherlands projections, which were given by the Ministry of Finance like 2 or 3 days ago. The Netherlands is looking at a public deficit of 12%. Mind you, they are coming from a budget surplus, right? To give an order of comparison, the Dutch deficit during the darkest hours of the financial crisis did not go above 5%. Here we are looking at deficit of 12%. and many other countries need that money. Now, that is true, but then rises the question, would the unified approach solve the financing question for these countries? And that's a big question, right? Now, the unified approach, what is it? It's like two pillars, right? Let's forget about pillar two. Pietro, I know you did your PhD, I think, on controlled foreign companies, right? And you probably would agree with me that pillar two, you know, this globe tax is, in the very last analysis, a super CFC.
Yes, it is.
Right? So okay, let's maybe forget it. So we look at pillar one, right? And we would say it's going to attribute this amount, ABC, you know, to the market or user country. Now, this amount A, which is basically super profits, right? They are not really as common as we think they are, right? There are maybe a handful of multinationals which have super profits. In this framework, I would like to mention actually a very interesting article which was written by, which was issued by the IMF earlier this year on this issue. Quite interesting. There is not a lot of data on which to base all of this, but the paper of the IMF tries to determine, okay, what kind of profits are we talking about, how to determine them, and how to eventually maybe allocate them between the different countries, right? So also this paper comes to the conclusion that when we talk about residual profits, it's really within a handful of multinationals, not much more than that, right? True, in those multinationals, the ones that really have residual profits, these residual profits usually can get to up to 70% of the total profit, right? Which is a huge. But it's only a handful of multinationals. The second thing is that, fine, you know, we can allocate some of these residual profits to the various countries, but it's not only the market and user countries that need the money. With this crisis, also the headquarter countries need the money, right? So how do we do about allocating all of that? Another issue that we have are losses. We are not, you know, when we started this discussion, everybody is thinking about profits. But we've moved from profits to losses now, and there are losses as well. How do we do about those, right? Now, that being said, personally, I have also a little bit of a problem with this entire approach. You know, I love tax economists. I envy them sometimes because basically they are able to do a lot of things that I cannot do myself. But I think the best description I heard it from a colleague, let's not mention his name, but a very distinguished one of the most respected international tax lawyers on the planet, in fact. And he told me, yeah, this is what happens, you know, this type of engineering, what you see now with this very complex proposals. This is what happens actually when you leave international tax policy to tax economists, right? You get into these complexities, right? In fact, the whole thing looks that there is a very good French expression, it's usine à gaz. It's like a gas plant, or, you know, you need an Isaac Newton to understand where all these pipes are coming from, where they are going there. So I would say, let's maybe, yeah, hit the pause button and think about, we know where we want to go. Think about how we should do it, probably in a better way.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dali. Really interesting and wide view on the current situation. Thank you, fantastic. Allow me to step a little bit further. So, having your experience and having your knowledge, if you want to say something about the future, how you see the future, what the states and the enterprises should do in the future for creating maybe a new tax environment and new tax rule, new tax framework.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of countries are busy with this at the moment. There are, let me see, I mean, there are matters that are of concern to developing countries. In particular, there are matters which are relevant to all countries generally. I would think for developing countries, maybe, well, first of all, at the moment, let's hit the pause button. It's not that what the OECD has been doing is not good. Or, I mean, first of all, what we are looking at is not really the BEPS project. The BEPS project is basically complete, right? It has been done with a lot of successes, and we have reached actually a level of no return on many of the BEPS and ATAD rules, right? Let's say country by country reporting is there. The MLI is there. A lot of rules about anti-hybrid, etc., you know, they are in ATAD, they are in the BEPS project. True, we do see a little bit of reluctance from countries at the moment to go further with some of the transparency initiatives, like the ultimate beneficial owner register, like in some cases also the economic substance rule, etc. But these are, what I have seen so far are deferrals. Countries are saying, I don't really have time for them now. I'm just deferring them, but I'm not renouncing them, right? So I think the BEPS project itself, it accomplished more than anyone could have reasonably expected. And it has been a great success, right? The international tax architecture we are looking at now is not really BEPS, is not really base erosion and profit shifting. It goes much further than that. It is actually devising a new international tax architecture and not necessarily linked to base erosion and profit shifting, right? So, yeah, at the moment, I think let's hit the pause button. Think about, there are various other ways to think about how we achieve this international tax architecture. There are a lot of very, very bright minds in the international tax profession who are thinking about it and writing about it. You could think about different things, maybe as simple as a withholding tax, or maybe as complex as a border adjustment tax, like what the Trump administration at one point was thinking about, right? Let's think about the how, right? With the knowledge that BEPS is already successful, so hitting the pause button now is not going to endanger BEPS, right? Now, on the more earth-to-earth topics, like what to do now with the crisis, you know, we have different things that countries are looking at. You have things which are on the expenditure side, and you have things which are on the revenue side. So on the expenditure side, we would be looking at matters like loss carry forwards, or maybe carrybacks, you know, to improve the liquidity of companies. We would be looking at matters like relaxing interest deduction rules. What would you do with interest deduction rules that limit you to 30% of EBITDA or 3 million of taxable income, right? We would be looking at matters like maybe relaxing debt write-off rules, that you would be able to write off your non-collectible debts for tax purposes, right? So this is what many countries are looking at. I think this is the direction what we should be looking at on the expenditure side. Of course, a lot of countries have brought in very common sense things like, okay, no assistance to companies which would proceed with dividend distributions or share buybacks. I think that's very common sense. If you have enough money to buy back shares for your shareholders or to distribute dividends, then why do you count on other taxpayers to help you out, right? It would be pretty much akin to socializing profit, privatizing profits and socializing losses. And obviously we don't want that, right? Now, on the revenue side, there are a lot of things that we can be thinking about. Well, let's go back for a minute to this amount A, which is like the super profit, residual profit. I mean, developing countries would be happy to already be able to tax normal profits. At the moment, they are not able to tax normal profits, let alone residual profits, right? So maybe you can help them doing that. Maybe you can help them, I don't know, there is something that is of interest to many developing countries, which never made it to the 15 BEPS action points, which is the indirect transfer of assets, right? If you look at the state, if Uganda is able to levy capital gains tax on a very important telecom transaction, which is structured into an indirect transfer of assets, well, it really doesn't need amount A, right? If it's able to do that, then it doesn't even need amount A, all right? We can think about a lot of other things. We can think about, for example, the German presidency of the EU is now proposing it, financial transaction taxes. Let's get to it. We've been discussing it for, 20 years? Let's do something about it. Maybe an aviation tax. Maybe VAT on aviation. I mean, I feel sorry for myself saying this because of my travel pattern, I probably end up paying this more than most ordinary people, but I'm happy to do that. And then it links to the greening of the economy on the other side, right? Maybe we can think about stuff like, maybe rethinking actually the allocation of tax and rights on employment income in the world. So these are some of the ideas that we probably would be thinking about.
Exactly. So I want to take the occasion exactly from the last thing that you mentioned about the allocation profits. So what do you think?
Of income.
Of income, of course. So what do you think about, of course, it's a good principle, so rethink about the allocation, but how to deal with it?
Very good question. Very good question. And okay, so we are in Corona time. So maybe we have too much time to ourselves to think about crazy things. And this is an area which I think should be put to discussion. I think it's time we put to discussion. I mean, for 100 years, we didn't know anything better than that. Employment income is taxable basically where the person is resident, where the employment is actually carried out. It is so obvious to us after 100 years that we cannot think about anything else, right? We do have very, very limited exceptions under Article 15 of the OECD model, but that's it. Employment income is taxable in the country where the employment is exercised, where the person is resident, right? Now, like you, I'm sure you have seen Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, leaving intensive care and thanking the Portuguese nurse that tended to him and basically saved his life, right? And I was touched by the words. I think he was very sincere in his words of thanks for their efforts. But I wonder whether it crossed his mind or any policymaker, is that nurse, that Portuguese nurse, who trained her, to become a nurse, from which taxpayers' money, and who is taxing her now, right? I don't know her personal stories, but I know that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of professionals, medical doctors and others, who are working in a country that's different from the country that trained them, right? If you would go in the summer to a French hospital, to the IC, chance is probably 9 in 10 that the doctor would be Algerian or Tunisian, right? Those at the forefront today in ICs and elsewhere in the West, they've been trained somewhere else. Now, trained by Portugal, okay, you could say Portugal is maybe getting some money from the structural funds, et cetera, and so it's like taking money from your right pocket, putting it into your left pocket. Okay. How about if that nurse was Syrian, was trained in Syria, or Egypt, or Ecuador? Why should they, their training should be paid for by Syria or Egypt or Ecuador, but their income tax be pocketed by the UK or the Netherlands? And this doesn't apply only to doctors, actually it applies to the brain drain, right? There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of professionals around the world working in the country, in a country that's different from the country that trained them. I have seen figures, I have seen over the past 2-3 years, there are like close to 1,000 Tunisian doctors who migrated to France and mostly are working because their diploma, they're not from the EU, so the diploma is not an equivalent to an EU diploma. What does that mean? They get actually the worst jobs and they are paid less. And many of them end up in ICs and working weekends and nights, etc. All right. I've seen figures that for one of those doctors, because all of them are paid, their training is paid off by Tunisian taxpayers, it would cost the country about 300,000 euro to train one doctor, right? If 1,000 of them go and work for France, what's that? That's a subsidy of 300 million euro from Tunisia to France. And then I say, there's something that's not right here, right? Of course, we are, modeled for 100 years to just think within the box. Employment income is taxable in the country where the employment is exercised. But I say, yeah, but for 100 years, we also didn't know better that for corporate income tax, in any case, that it's taxed in the country of residence unless you have sufficient nexus with physical presence with everything in the other country. Yet now we are talking about a nexus that's not a physical nexus. Yet now we are talking about taxing corporation in another country because it has users in the other country, right? And so I think that, I mean, it might sound crazy. In any case, it's not, I assure you, it's not as crazy as it sounds. It's not as crazy as the suggestion, for example, to inject, what was it, bleach to get rid of the corona things. But, well, in any case, it is probably thinking out of the box, but it is something that I think we should put forward for discussion. It is technically difficult to probably implement. Well, so is what was it, Pillar 1, right? And I would think maybe this is the moment to start thinking about this matter.
Really good. Really, as we said always in these talks, we need. It's important now. It's time to think and rethink about our tax system, not only on a domestic level but on an international one. So, good chance to speak with you and to have this nice overview and this important, interesting overview on everything, also on the employees' income, really new and to think about. I like it. I like it. You're right.
Thank you. I actually did discuss this with dear Italian friend, common friend, I think. And I understand that countries like Italy also have the same issue with thousands of Italian professionals working outside.
Yeah.
Basically trained by Italy, but working outside. And the good things with this pandemic is that, it gives you the time sometimes to just go back to basics and start rethinking the system. And that's the challenge.
No, and it was also really, really interesting. This your different view also on pillar 1 and pillar 2. That normally we just do think about just web taxation, no, and digital taxation, but you underline that it's just an occasion to rethink about the international taxation and to the allocation of the income, no? So we can also have this
with the knowledge that we shouldn't be afraid for BEPS. BEPS has already achieved
exactly
more than anyone could have expected, actually.
Thank you very much, Dali.
Well, thank you very much. I hope to see you in person in better times soon.
We have to.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dali. Ciao, grazie. Take care. Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao. Bye-bye.